Well, our next speaker is Rachel Preston Prinz, who's also the founder of Arcania and Architecture for Everybody, on a special talk today called Girard's Projects in New Mexico. Come on up.
Hi there. So I'm kind of one of the odd people out on this. I'm not a Girard expert, or at least not. I didn't consider myself one. Although maybe in New Mexico at this point I might be heading in that direction. But I want to acknowledge one of my biases, and something that's come up over and over again this weekend that has reminded me of it, and that I'm trained as an architect. And I specialize, spent 25 years specializing in historic preservation. But due to a fault in my vision, I have macular degeneration, I'm going blind. So my center vision is starting to go. But one of the interesting side effects of that is that it has made me kind of hyper aware of I think differently, and so I've become rather good at connecting dots and also finding patterns. So we're going to talk a little bit about patterns today that I don't know that have been talked about, but I just want to acknowledge that that's a bias of mine. So anyway, so welcome everybody, and thanks obviously for allowing me to be here and share a little bit of the story with you guys of Girard's work in New Mexico. I love this picture from the Vidra book where when Girard is traveling through New Mexico, he's painting a landscape with words. And the words that he's using are experiential, right? Up, clear, dark, right? It's the way that he's experiencing those places. And I think it's really poignant, because that's what New Mexico is kind of known for. And I think that that's also what he did. He created these sort of landscapes of experience. And I love that when he came to New Mexico, one of the things he said was that he came here for the luxury of uninterrupted time, which I think is why I stay here too. But he said that crossing the moon would be boring in comparison to crossing the Rio Grande. And that was from a trip that he took down to Mexico where they went through some particularly interesting crossing. It's very easy for us today. But in those days, actually, some of these roads didn't exist. You know, they're doing switchbacks on some of this stuff. And in some places in New Mexico, that's still true. So when he moves to Santa Fe in 1953, he's already successful. He is already, Herman Miller has just made him the director of the textiles division. And he moves into this house off Canyon Road. And he turns it, many people have called it a laboratory of architecture. I love that. He comes in and for those of you who've been here for a minute and not just in hotels, you've noticed that we have a lot of texture on our buildings. And he sort of strips it down and takes it to this white place and sort of makes all that invisible in a way, but he's also still keeping it. And then he starts introducing these pops of color and this amazing storage system that becomes, it kind of ties into a lot of other things that he does over the years. And he does these layering of objects in that, which he's constantly moving around. He has his first iteration of a conversation pitch, which wasn't very long-lived. But I was taken with, when looking through pictures for all of this, about how much all of this tends to change, especially in his house. He spends his life tweaking. The 30 plus years he's here, he's constantly tweaking things in the house. Some of this is from this exhibit. And it becomes more and more influential as more and more architecture magazines are covering it. It's that his vision starts to go out into the world. And interestingly, he got to Santa Fe at this really cool / tragic time. In the 1950s, there was a group of people here who had decided that they were going to codify Santa Fe architecture, and they wanted to create something that was sort of uniform, and they wanted to do something that was modern, but they were responding to the City Beautiful movement, and they called Santa Fe the City Different, and that actually started in 1912. But there was a lot of modernism starting to show up in Santa Fe, and some people didn't like that. And so they decided, oh, we need an ordinance to create this style of architecture. Interestingly, there's an architect who led that process called John Gaumeme. He's really famous here, and a lot of people attribute this building here. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. The original version of this building was attributed to him. And he really is the father of this version of architecture in New Mexico and several others. He's an extraordinary person. But anyway, but it wasn't totally a beloved thing, and there was a whole group of people here, including Alexander Girard, who were part of this Southwest Design Council, and they actually fought against the ordinance because they thought that it would lead, A, to them not being able to experiment with architecture, and B, to extreme gentrification. But somehow along the way, he and John Gaumeme developed some kind of relationship. And I'm not really sure about this because we've only just started piecing these things together, as we'll find out as we get into St. John's. In 1957, Girard finished Miller House with Eero Saarinen. We've talked about that several times today. And he's got his quintessential storage system in the back. And all this is going to start coming together here in a minute. In 1958, he does Herman Miller in San Francisco, and he does another textile line for Herman Miller. And I'm just trying to put this a little bit in context to that time period of what he's doing in other places. We have the irregular grid displays again. In 1960, he does La Fonda del Sol, and this is where we start to come in to really get into Girard's work, or this project really starts to come into play in Santa Fe because John Gaumeme goes and sees it. And in 1961, he establishes the Girard Foundation for his giant collection of folk art, and we got his irregular grids again, and ultimately that collection becomes what we know of as Moifa today. And in 1962, he does a preview of the Nelson Show here, in what is now sort of more known as the Nelson Show, of the Nativity here. And then in 1964, or 63 actually, he starts working on the John Deere mural in Moline, Illinois. And what's really interesting to me about this is he's using paper things, and they're artifacts, they're historical artifacts. They tell a story about time and place. But now he can take his grid and he can lay them on top of each other and starts to have more depth. And then we get to St. John's. Now, what's interesting about St. John's is that in 1961, John Gaumeme was one of the major architects and major players in bringing St. John's to New Mexico. And in the very first letter he writes to them, he copies Alexander Girard, which we didn't know before about, a week ago? 2 weeks ago, maybe? So we knew that in 1963, when they were starting to do the building, they already had building drawings for the building from Holian and Buckley, and that's an interesting story that I could do a whole talk on. But Holian and Buckley is an important name in this story, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. Where am I going? But what most people know about St. John's is about the mural, which is the variation of what we've seen before, right? It's the grid. But now, instead of using artifacts, he's using ideas. And they're ideas that he worked on with the staff of the college. And I'm going to get way into detail about that here in a minute. we're going to come back to St. John's. And that's where I come into the story. So in 1965, he does the Unitarian Church in Albuquerque, and he does their altarpiece. And I think Marshall and he had gone out and collected all this wood. So I think some of this wood is in this exhibit as well, in the Hemes. And the Unitarian congregation came to him and they're like, we have 22 symbols and we want it all to, we want to create this altarpiece. And he did create this altarpiece for them, and I have a couple funny stories about that here in a second. But in about 10 years ago now, the Unitarian Church was building a new sanctuary. By the way, the old sanctuary was built by Hervey Hoschauer. That name's going to come into play in a second, too. But about 10 years ago, they built a new sanctuary. I happened to be living in Albuquerque at the time, and I'm a member of the Unitarian Church. And one of the girls who was also a member, who was a friend of mine and a neighbor, knew that I was trained as a historic architect, and that she's like, they don't have any idea how valuable this is. Nobody really knows what this is or what it means or any of these things. We need someone like you who can help us figure out how to move it from point A to point B. So I developed a preservation plan for the mural. But it was really funny, a couple just little tidbit stories about, and here we go down the rabbit hole of Rachel likes patterns. I don't know if you can see the double intersecting circles. One has a flame in it and one has a cross in it. That's the Unitarians and the Universalists put together because they were both different sects. Basically, Unitarians are, they believe that there's truth in every tradition, and including no tradition, philosophy. They take their inspiration from all of the world's religions. Anyway, so their symbols are these two intersecting circles. And Girard was like, do we have to use that symbol? And they're like, it's the symbol of our church. And he didn't like it, I think, because it wasn't really symmetrical. That's my best guess. But he was like, okay, but I'm going to make it small. They're like, no, it's it's our symbol. We really need to use it. So he ends up putting it in, and I'll show you in just a sec why that's funny, why it's funny how he approached it. But when they came in, they also discovered that there were two new symbols that nobody had asked for. The heart and the star. But he thought that those were important symbols to include in a religious space because it was all about love and light. And I thought that was really amazing. The churches, they accepted that. They're like, okay, fine. But the irony of it is, right, he hates the symbol and he's also Catholic. So what does he do? He puts the symbol off-centered so the cross is smack dab in the middle of the altar. And this is the mural in its new location. Oh, gosh. So he's done John Deere, he's done St. John's, and now he's done the Unitarian symbol mural. And we've realized now that it was between 1963 and 1965 that all three were done. Now, a lot of people know about St. John's. They know about the 38-panel one that's finished. They don't know that there are another 170 blank frames that go all the way down the hall. Unless you've been there, it's not really talked about that much. And they were intended to have symbols in them. Then we have the Unitarian mural. And then John Deere. I wanted to put them all together because there's something kind of fascinating that happens here. We just discovered this last week too. And that is that there are hearts that were there's a heart in the Unitarian mural. I showed you that one. The one below is the one that was intended for St. John's. It's one of 38 symbols that we have that are drawn of his, that were intended to be there. And then there are hundreds of hearts in the John Deere mural. And I just think it's kind of fascinating that this connects all of them. Anyway, going back into time for a second. 1966, he does L'Etoile. And I could do a talk about all of these things. But I'm trying to put it into context because in 1966, he's also doing the compound, which is here in town. And if you haven't been yet, you really should go. It's still an operational restaurant, although you need reservations if you go after like 5 o'clock, even for the bar now. But the compound's really cool because it's a historic house in Santa Fe. We have these house types here that are sort of been glommed on over the years, and they end up creating these sort of square-ish, rectangular-ish places that we call compounds. Compounds happen all over Santa Fe. This isn't the only one, but he updated this one. And he does these amazing interiors, and he's using some of our local traditions to decorate it with. This is the only time I know of him using a rainbow. But what's interesting about that was it was very in vogue in Santa Fe at that point to use any reference to Acama's historic mission. And once upon a time, until about 10 years ago, I think, the historic mission had rainbows on the interiors, and now that's been updated to a more recent tribal ideal. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, there's a tree of life made out of, I think, Peruvian objects on the back wall. And he's using the same seating system as he did at L'Etoile, and he opened all but one room. And like, I don't know if you can notice or if you can make out the tree trunk, that is him fixing a column for a structural wall that he removed. We would never get away with that today. He actually had a real tree. And then there's obviously the famous compound bar, which is a sunken bar, very much like a conversation pit. It's the only one that I'm aware of that still exists in this area. And it's the only room he did not change in the house. And supposedly, I don't know if this is true, he actually did design the bar to make it look like a 4-poster bed. Which I thought was kind of cool. But the other thing that's really neat about this, where I'm going to get back into this in just a second, is you have this wavy ceiling, which is really a viga ceiling that's been plastered over, so you can't see the vigas and the latillas. And that's the one that, if you were here Thursday night, I was talking about the snake symbolism. He's got a snake that's going down this, about a 10-foot long snake coming down this ceiling, and it looks like it's moving when you're looking at it. It's kind of amazing. But he's also got a door that has the Unitarian mural blocks on it. And he was really a master of, I personally believe that Girard was actually a master of Spanish Pueblo revival style architecture. He just did it in a completely new way. He's using the exact language that we've always used here. He's just being more playful with it, and he's doing it in a modern interpretation, but like one of the key ingredients to Spanish Pueblo revival style architecture is our ability to look through layers. And I just want to, I mean, obviously, a lot of you know this, but if he had always spoken in a symbolic language since he was 10 years old, and he created a symbol language for the Republic of Fife, evidently multiple languages, which I didn't know that before. But when he was in college, he also used symbols to sign his drawings. He used a triangle, a square, and a circle for AHG. And in the compound, we see him using not only a heart, which is in the front as you're coming in the front door, but he has the sun, the moon, the snake, and the tree of life, which he also uses on the hemisphere in 1968, which is kind of fascinating. I didn't realize they used the same symbologies. And really fascinating tidbit that I don't think I talk about it here. That he and Georgia O'Keeffe both had snakes in their, Georgia O'Keeffe has a rattlesnake coiled in a bunco that was installed the same time that the spiral, roughly the same time as the spiral snake in Alexander Girard's dining room. And so they were friends. We know they were friends. I was like, what kind of conversations are they having at dinner? Really interesting. Oh, and there's a new scholar from the Georgia O'Keeffe who has just pieced together pretty much a very complete story of Georgia O'Keeffe and Alexander Girard and their relationship in regard to design and how each one influenced the other. It's an incredible story, and I'm really honored that I'm actually going to be curating an edition of a magazine here called for April and May next year for Architecture Month and Preservation Month, and it's going to be wholly on architecture, and I'm going to have that scholar tell that story, so we'll be able to contribute to the knowledge of their relationships. And then we land here at 1982 at the Folk Art, and if you look down, there's more of the Unitarian mural on the base. And what's really fascinating about this to me is this building, the original building, was always attributed to John Gaw-Meem, and it was John Gaw-Meem's office that did it. But in 1971, he actually wrote a letter to the editor of the New Mexican, and he said, "This is nuts. This is not like, this should not be attributed to me. This should be attributed to Julian." Who was his subordinate in his office, and he kind of lavished this praise on him about how he had this amazing eye. So Julian and Meem did the original version of this building, and when they did an addition for the Girard collection, it was Harvey Hoschauer who did the original Unitarian church. It's a very small world. I'm kind of in awe of it. And so one of the cool things that I've discovered over the years is that every single project in New Mexico uses this. 4 of the 5 use a wooden grid pattern, patinated grid pattern. That is that wood that was on the Unitarian mural. And then there's one project that uses the same pattern, but now in brick for durability, and that's at St. John's. So 1964, John Gaw-Meem has said, or 1961, John Gaw-Meem's already got people interested in creating the St. John's thing. He's copying Girard on the literature. And the college hires him to be an architecture consultant, not the architect, but a consultant to help them figure out master planning and all those kinds of things that we do in preservation, or in architecture. And he's very clear from the get-go as he's building a building program. He's talking about how the building end is going to be white with pops of color. And so I think from the very get-go, he had an idea that he wanted Girard to be involved because he wanted that sort of modern element to it. And so he brings Girard in. As I said before, the building was mostly designed. The structure of the building itself was designed, and Girard comes in, and he develops a decoration plan for it. And those decorations, including the super amazing chandeliers, and we knew about many of the things that he had designed, but in our research, we actually found many, many more things that he had designed. And we also found out that he had a huge role in talking about the finishes of the building, and actually they made so many changes to the finishes of the building that St. John's actually protested the architect's fees for that, which I thought was kind of fascinating. But he did a seal for them, 4 different versions of desks. We thought there were 2 different versions of tables. Turns out there's at least 4. And he arranged these color pops, and then he also chose folk art for the exhibit, or for the space. And all of this still exists. The college calls the black and white, or the tan chairs, they call them the Meem chairs, which I thought was kind of neat, named after John Gaw-Meem. He designed soft goods, as upholstered furnishings. And then you can't really see it, and I don't have a very good picture of a new version, but there's a little table in the background that looks like it's kind of a knockoff of one of the Herman Miller designs. And that end table, and everything here is done in brushed black instead of stainless like the Herman Millers were. And we haven't quite tied all of those things together. In fact, we found some of these. Jennifer sent me pictures of some of this stuff this week. So, and then there's this awesome mystery that we have. There's this cool coat rack up on the second floor. And by the way, we're doing that tour tomorrow at 10, so you'll get to see all this if you want to come play with us. It'll probably be about half an hour, maybe an hour. We can talk more about this. But there's this cool custom coat rack. And at first we looked at it, and even Laura looked at it, and we were like, well, he didn't really do a lot of spindly stuff, and these are made out of spindles. But it's feasible now. We've looked at things a little bit more, and it fits so perfectly in that space that we're like, maybe Doc did that. You know, we're not really sure. We're hoping to find more information, so if anybody knows anything, please let me know, because I've never seen anything like that before. And everybody has probably seen the picture in Todd's book of the doors, the East Indian paintings in the back. They actually handmade all of those frames and connected them in Girard's studio, and much of the furnishings. And there are Clore chairs. That wooden chair down there has Herman Miller fabrics from Girard's collection on pretty much everything. And it was originally supposed to be the Miller stripe, but it looks like from the pictures that it's actually checkers or mini check. But the thing that I love the most about this is when you look at all the old pictures, they're almost all in black and white. But what you don't get is that the doors are actually crazy colors and so amazing. And it was designed with this idea that that's what the Spanish people did. And I thought that was so interesting. I'm like, kinda, no. But he did it in his way and made it really modern, and it's really beautiful, and they're not all that demure, by the way. And the college actually recently put together an exhibition where you can go and actually see all of the sketches, the original sketches that Girard did, hand-painted sketches, or the office did, that shows the iterations of the doors. He also did this movable partitions up in the upstairs gallery above the dining room. They're based on a design that he got from the Phoenix Museum. And then they wanted to do scattered murals around the building. He did the telephone, one over the telephone kiosk area. And there was actually supposed to be one around the Great Hall stage, but it was never realized. This is one of the the junior seminar room, and it is, he came in and he changed the way that the coves work. He changed the height of the fireplace brick. He made it the same brick as he used throughout the building to kind of tie it together. And there's this space that's kind of plain. It's an auditorium, and I don't think it ever got done. I don't know. We've never seen pictures of it done this way, but it was originally supposed to have gilt gold panels on the doors and all through the room. Probably ran out of money. And this is the part of the mural that everyone kind of knows about. There are 240 spaces on the complete mural. This piece represents sort of, I think, there was many building programs designed. It was supposed to happen in phases. Many of the phases never got done. Only the main one got done. But it's every one of these means something in the context of the 7 liberal arts that they teach at St. John's. I could do a whole talk just on that. That's so interesting. But one of my favorite symbols, it's so funny. So see the long blank on the left? It's just a long stripe, right? That's actually a symbol. It's a line. And according to the school, it's a line from geometry, from Euclidean geometry, a 2-dimensional line, a way that you could find a way through space. But on Girard's notes, he calls it a plumb line, right? That's his architect self coming out and working in 3 dimensions. And I just think that's so amazing. And then this is what we have. Where Sean and I are about to talk about our future work. This is the looking down the hallway. The painted mural, the painted part of the mural, is way down there. It's just a tiny section. There were many, many symbols designed for the mural, and they represent an incredible array of things. Girard added 2 more symbols to the list on this one as well. He adds hearts, and he adds an egg, which I thought was really interesting. But all of the only symbols we have, there's about 40 of them. We got them from Vitra. Well, actually, the college got them from Vitra several years ago, but we're being allowed to use them right now. But all of them are done in black and white, except for one. This pink and black one is the only one that we have that's colored. And it is, the YNRI is from one of Giotto's paintings that's housed at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And on Girard's original sketch, black and white sketch for it, in the painting, it's gold lettering on red background. And in his sketch, he maintains gold lettering, he notes it, gold on red. But when he colors it, he does it in black and hot pink. And I think that's really fascinating because when Girard got into doing textiles, part of the reason that he did that was because he said, as I understand it, that textiles weren't available in primary colors like hot pink. And I just wanted to show you just a couple more pictures to show you that nothing's really changed. It's all still being used. It's all completely intact. I showed just a little bit more of the wall on that than the other column because I wanted y'all to see the pops of color and then the doors in situ. But it's pretty much 55 years later. Now, the one thing that has changed, and you see it really visibly here, is there's the floor chairs that actually are shared with Annapolis and the campus here. Interestingly, the compounds chairs also used to be floor chairs. There was a different style, but they looked very similar. But that's the only thing about the compound that's outside of tonal color differences that's really fundamentally different. But the school has moved away from the floor chairs in that area. I'm not exactly sure why. And then the upstairs balcony was originally more of a lounge area, and it's not really being used that way in the same way now. And interestingly, Jennifer, the librarians, Jennifer and Craig who are librarians at the college, took me around the other day, and we were talking about some of the stuff, and I think that, actually, you know what, I'm just not going to say that. I'm gonna let Sean and I talk about it here in a minute. I'm gonna talk about it. So anyway, I was walking through the hall one day and I saw, this is one of the brightly painted doors, and on the downstairs, and I saw this "You Are Loved" on it. And I just thought, my first reaction was, oh my God, please take that off. And my second reaction was, oh my God, how perfect. So I'm going to be doing a whole Instagram profile of bits and pieces of all of these projects. So if you're into Instagram, that'll start in December. I'm at Arcadia Design. And then that's all.